When my boss, Kelvin Dorsey, called me into the conference room, I thought it was about the quarterly report I had finished at 2 a.m. Instead, the air in the room felt heavy and cold. He didn't ask me to sit. He just slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. It was a demotion letter. My eyes scanned the text, trying to make sense of the words, but then Calvin spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You're taking the fall for the missing $900,000. Sign it, or I'll make sure you never work in finance again." My knees went weak. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Through the glass walls, I could see the busy office floor. Everyone was working, drinking coffee, laughing, completely unaware that my career was being executed in front of them. Calvin wasn't just firing me, he was destroying me to save himself. I looked at him, expecting to see guilt, but instead he smirked. He picked up his phone and dialed HR, speaking loud enough for me to hear. He told them I was emotionally unstable and a danger to the company. The injustice hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Before we continue, please make sure to like and subscribe. Every single like helps push these real stories of betrayal and justice to people who might be going through the same pain. And make sure to watch until the end. You'll want to see how she survives everything thrown at her. Also, comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I walked back to my cubicle, stunned, feeling like I was moving underwater. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Coworkers I had eaten lunch with for 3 years suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. They whispered behind cupped hands and avoided eye contact as I passed. The rumor mill was already spinning. I hadn't even packed my box yet when a notification pinged on every monitor in the department. Calvin didn't even wait for me to sit before emailing the entire division. The subject line read, "Departmental restructuring and performance concerns." My cheeks burned with humiliation when I saw heads pop up over cubicle walls, eyes darting toward me. He was painting a narrative in real time, labeling me as incompetent before I could defend myself. I sat in my chair, my hands shaking as I read the lies on the screen. This wasn't just a simple demotion or a bad performance review. You don't destroy someone this publicly unless you are trying to bury something massive. I knew something was very wrong. This wasn't just about my job title. My new role was a nightmare designed to break my spirit. They moved my desk to a cramped corner near the printer, and my workload shifted from complex financial analysis to basic data entry. It was the kind of work I did when I was an intern 10 years ago. The worst part was the hierarchy shift. I was now forced to do admin tasks for people I used to supervise. Tara Knox, a junior analyst I had trained just 6 months ago, walked up to my desk with a stack of unorganized receipts. She looked at her shoes, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm so sorry, Elena," she mumbled, placing the messy pile in front of me. "Calvin said you have to file these by noon." She hurried away before I could respond. I felt a lump form in my throat. I watched Calvin walk by the aisle a moment later. He didn't look at me, but he slowed his pace just enough to enjoy the sight of me, buried under grunt work. It felt like he wanted me completely crushed. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the work, but my instincts as an analyst wouldn't shut off. During my lunch break, I logged into the system to check the financial logs I once handled daily. I wanted to see who had taken over my accounts. I clicked on the folder for the vendor payments, a file I had built from scratch. Access denied. A red box flashed on the screen. That was strange. Even as a lower-level employee, I should have had read-only access to historical data. I tried another folder. Access denied. My stomach tightened into a knot. I navigated to the system audit trail, the digital footprint that shows who touched which file. Several entries were suddenly locked under Calvin's direct admin credentials. That had never happened before. Usually, everything was transparent, for compliance reasons. Why lock it now? I scrolled back to the dates coinciding with the missing funds. My name had been removed from the audit trail entirely, replaced by user_deleted. Someone had changed access and removed my name from entire audit trails. That night, I stayed late. I told the cleaning crew I was catching up on filing, but I was hunting. I managed to access an archived email server that hadn't been scrubbed yet. I searched for my name combined with audit. What I found made my blood run cold. I found an email chain between Calvin and the CFO dated 2 weeks ago. In the emails, Calvin was blaming me for irregularities in the accounts, irregularities he'd never told me about and certainly never asked me to fix. "Alina's struggling to keep the numbers straight," he wrote. "I'm worried she's hiding mistakes." He had been planting seeds of doubt for weeks while smiling to my face. He even scheduled a confidential meeting with upper management to discuss mitigation strategies regarding my employment. My chest pounded in the silent office. The glow of the monitor illuminated the lies. He wasn't just making me a scapegoat, he was carefully constructing a criminal timeline. He was building a story where I was the villain. The next morning, the escalation continued. I arrived at my corner desk only to find my things packed in a box. Calvin stood there with his arms crossed. "We need the space for the new interns," he said flatly. He pointed toward the back of the office, past the break room, to a heavy metal door. "You've been assigned to Archive Room B. You can work from there until things cool down." Archive Room B was a basement storage closet. It had no windows, a flickering fluorescent light, and stacks of banker's boxes lining the walls. The air smelled like old carpet, dust, and neglect. There was a small, wobbly table in the corner with a slow computer. I sat there, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, completely isolated from the rest of the team. It was solitary confinement. He wanted me to quit. He wanted me to walk out the door so he could tell everyone I fled because I was guilty. Every day felt like punishment. I sat in the dim light and wondered how far he was willing to go. 2 days later, the phone in the storage room rang. It was HR. They wanted to see me immediately. I walked up to the main floor, blinking against the bright lights, feeling like an intruder in my own workplace. The HR director, a woman named Diane who used to ask about my kids, now looked at me with cold, clinical detachment. "Calvin has reported some erratic behavior," she said, not looking up from her notepad. "He feels you're having trouble adjusting to the new role. We wanted to offer you stress leave." Her tone made it clear they didn't care about my stress. They wanted me out of the building. They believed Calvin's narrative completely. "I'm fine," I said, my voice cracking despite my best effort to sound strong. "I'm just doing my job." Diane exchanged a look with her assistant. "We'll be monitoring your behavior closely," she warned. It was a threat masked as policy. I left the office shaking, realizing the entire system was rigged against me. I returned to the basement, feeling hopeless. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. It was Marcus Lee, a senior accountant I had worked with for 5 years. He didn't step inside. He just held the door open slightly, looking back over his shoulder to ensure the hallway was clear. "Elena," he whispered urgently, "you need to be careful." I stood up, surprised he was talking to me. "Why? What's happening?" He looked nervous. "Calvin has been meeting privately with the executive team every morning. I walked past the conference room and I heard your name come up a lot. They're talking about legal action." My hands started to shake. Legal action? They weren't just firing me, they were planning to prosecute me to cover the theft. "Thanks, Marcus," I whispered. He nodded and let the door click shut. I stood in the center of the dusty room, the silence pressing against my ears. It felt like the walls were closing in. The humiliation wasn't over. The next day, Calvin called me up to the main floor during the lunch rush. He held up a printed spreadsheet for everyone to see. "This is unacceptable, Elena," he announced, his voice booming across the quiet bullpen. "A simple formula error? This cost us 2 hours of reconciliation." I looked at the sheet. It was a file he had sent me with the error already embedded in a protected cell I couldn't edit. But arguing would only make me look unstable like he claimed. Everyone stared. The silence was suffocating. He called me careless and said he was disappointed in my lack of professionalism. I stood there taking the verbal beating, feeling myself shrinking into the floor. I could see pity in some eyes and judgment in others. After he dismissed me with a wave of his hand, I walked back to the basement. A few coworkers who were in the hallway turned their backs to avoid me completely after that. I kept my head down, trying to survive the week. On Thursday, I went to the break room to get water, timing it when I thought it would be empty. Tara Knox and another analyst were there, whispering near the coffee machine. They didn't hear me walk in. "I heard HR is just waiting for the paperwork. They're going to fire her next week. Kelvin said they have enough cause now." My chest tightened, and I quietly backed out of the room before they saw me. I retreated to the storage room and sat in the dark. Next week. I had days, maybe less. The fear I had been carrying turned into something darker, something sharper. Panic was useless. Crying was useless. If I was going down, I needed to know exactly why. I wiped my eyes and looked at the boxes of old files surrounding me. I knew I needed answers. The storage room was filled with dead files, paperwork from 5 or 10 years ago that no one ever looked at. I started opening boxes, looking for anything related to Calvin's past projects. Most of it was junk. But in a dusty box labeled Vendor Contracts 2019, tucked between 2 thick binders, I found a small silver USB drive. It wasn't labeled. I plugged it into my slow computer. My hands trembled as I opened the files. It wasn't archived contracts. It was a shadow ledger. It showed archived reports that Calvin must have thought he deleted. Several spreadsheets showed accounts draining money into vendors I didn't recognize. Companies with vague names like Apex Solutions and Riverfront Consulting. I cross-referenced them with the Public Business Registry on my phone. They were shell companies. And at the bottom of every transfer request, there was a digital signature. Every transfer had been authorized by Calvin. I was staring at the screen, mesmerized by the sheer scale of the theft, when the door suddenly swung open. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. Calvin stood there, filling the doorway, his shadow stretching across the floor. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice was low, lacking the fake professional tone he used upstairs. He stepped into the room, his eyes flicking to the computer screen. "Why are you digging through things that aren't yours?" His tone was cold, threatening. I quickly minimized the window, my fingers slipping on the mouse. "I was just organizing the files, like you asked," I lied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Looking for the old Q3 reports." He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, like a predator assessing prey. "Don't get creative, Elena. Just do your job." He turned and left, but inside, a line had been crossed. I was done being scared. I waited 10 minutes to make sure he wasn't coming back. Then I went to work. I knew I couldn't leave the evidence on the computer lab. If IT remoted in, they would wipe it. I took the USB drive and copied everything onto it. Then I logged into my personal encrypted cloud storage and uploaded every single file. I didn't stop there. I emailed copies to a hidden draft folder in my personal email. I backed them up in 3 different places. As the progress bars loaded, I felt a shift in my body posture. I sat up straighter. The anxiety that had been choking me for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. Calvin thought he had buried me in this basement to silence me. Instead, he had put me right next to his graveyard of secrets. I pocketed the USB drive. If Calvin wanted a war, I had the truth. The next day, I became a ghost. I stopped reacting to his insults. I stopped looking nervous. Instead, I started documenting. I bought a small notebook and kept it in my purse. I wrote down every conversation, every task he assigned, every insult he threw my way. I went back into the system, moving carefully now. I didn't try to open the locked files again. Instead, I tracked the metadata. I found logs showing when files were altered. I took screenshots of the timestamps. I matched the dates of the shell company transfers from the USB drive to the dates of the errors Calvin had accused me of. The timeline matched perfectly. Whenever he stole money, he created a fake crisis to blame on someone else. The more I gathered, the clearer it became. Calvin had been embezzling for years. I knew I couldn't go to HR. They were in his pocket. I needed outside help. On Saturday, I contacted Deborah Hollins. She was a retired auditor who had mentored me early in my career. We met at a diner 2 towns over so no one would see us. I slid a printed copy of the shadow ledger across the table. Deborah put on her reading glasses and scanned the columns. Her brow furrowed, then her eyes widened. She looked up at me, her face pale. "Elena, these patterns are unmistakable," she said softly. "This is structured layering. He's moving money through 3 different accounts before withdrawing it." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You aren't crazy. And knowing Calvin, you aren't the first. He has framed others before." Hearing her say it was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I finally had validation. "You have enough to bury him," Deborah said, keeping her voice low. "But you have to be smart. If you release this now, he'll claim the files are forged or that you stole them. You need to trap him." She warned me to stay quiet until I had everything lined up with the authorities. So, on Monday, I played the role. I went back to the basement. When Calvin came down to sneer at me about a filing error, I looked at the floor. I apologized. I acted defeated. I let my shoulders slump. "I'm just trying to hold on to my job, Calvin," I said weakly. He smiled, a nasty, satisfied look. "Maybe you're just not cut out for this level of work anymore," he said. He walked away looking satisfied, thinking he'd broken me. But inside, I was building a case. Deborah gave me the website for the federal financial regulatory body. It wasn't just a complaint form. It was a secure whistleblower portal designed for corporate fraud. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I organized my evidence. I uploaded the shadow ledgers. I uploaded the email chain where he planned to frame me. I uploaded the screenshots of the altered access logs. I wrote a detailed summary explaining the shell companies and the pattern of embezzlement. I didn't sign my name on the form yet. I checked the box for anonymous whistleblower. I hit submit. It felt anticlimactic, just a click of a mouse. It felt like dropping stones into a deep well, waiting for a splash that might never come. But I knew the data was real. Each document echoed back with power. The following Tuesday started like any other day. Calvin was shouting at Tara about a coffee order. The office hummed with stress. Then, at 10 a.m., the glass doors at the front of the office swung open. 4 people in dark suits walked in. They didn't look like clients. They wore badges on lanyards. They walked straight to Calvin's glass office. I stood in the doorway of the storage room, watching. I saw Calvin looked up, annoyed, and then I saw his face drain of color. The lead agent showed him a warrant. Calvin stood up, knocking his expensive chair back. He tried to play it cool, smoothing his tie, but I could see his hands shaking from across the room. The office went deadly silent. The auditors didn't go into a conference room. They took over Calvin's computer right there. They demanded the immediate release of the server access logs. The lead auditor, a sharp-looking woman named Ms. Vance, started asking loud, direct questions. "We show discrepancies in the vendor payouts dating back 4 years," she said. Calvin laughed nervously. "That's impossible. We have strict controls. I have an employee, Elena, who has been making errors recently. Perhaps," Miss Vance cut him off. "We aren't looking at recent errors, Mr. Dorsey. We are looking at admin-level overrides." They pulled up the log on the big screen in his office. Every altered file pointed back to Calvin's credentials. He stammered, his sweat visible now. "Someone must have framed me. Someone hacked my login." Nobody believed him. The auditors were methodical. They requested the specific files I had uploaded, the ones Calvin thought were deleted. He watched them navigate to folders he thought were secure. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. "Where are you getting this?" he demanded. Who sent you this?" Miss Vance didn't look up. "We are cross-referencing with documents provided by a whistleblower." Calvin looked confused. He didn't even know there was a whistleblower. He thought he'd isolated me completely. His voice rose to a shout. Who reported me? I demand to know." He scanned the room, looking at Tara, looking at Marcus. His eyes grazed over me, standing in the back, but he dismissed me immediately. He didn't think I was smart enough. I stayed silent. Miss Vance turned the monitor so Calvin could see it. It was the shadow ledger from the USB drive, the one linking the shell companies directly to his personal authorization codes. "Mr. Dorsey," she said, her voice carrying through the silent office, "these files trace the missing funds directly to your approvals. We have matched the shell company IP addresses to your home network." Calvin's mouth fell open. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The smirk that had defined his face for months was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. The office staff, the people who had shunned me, stared in shock. Everyone in the room went silent. 2 police officers arrived 10 minutes later. They didn't use handcuffs yet, but they flanked Calvin as he was escorted out of the building. He was shouting that it was all a mistake, that he was being set up, that his team was incompetent. HR stood by the elevators, whispering frantically among themselves. Diane, the director who had threatened me, looked terrified. She knew she had enabled him. As Calvin was marched past the bullpen, he looked small. He looked pathetic. No one defended him. No one stood up. As he passed the hallway leading to the storage room, I stepped out. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched him. For the first time in months, I stood tall. The aftermath was swift. The company wanted to avoid a lawsuit, and they knew exactly how badly they had treated me. A week later, the regional vice president flew in. He issued a formal apology to me in front of the entire staff. They restored my title of senior analyst. They offered me 6 months of back pay to cover the emotional distress and promoted me to lead the new compliance division. They moved me out of the basement and into a real office with a window. Co-workers who once avoided me now stopped by to congratulate me, acting like they had supported me all along. I was polite, but I didn't forget. I stayed humble. I had survived a storm no one understood. A month later, the final report from the federal investigation came in. My whistleblower file had exposed the entire $900,000 scheme. Calvin was facing multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. He was looking at 10 years in prison. I sat in my new office, the sun shining on my desk, reading the report with steady hands. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't broken a single law. I had simply told the truth when it mattered most. I looked at the empty chair across from me where Tara sat, waiting for my instructions on the new audit. "Ready to begin?" I asked. She nodded, respecting me. And as I opened the file, I finally felt whole again.